Abelard is part of that introduction or reintroduction of the philosophical spirit into the West, which had gone into abeyance for centuries. There are reasons for that. The lack of the basic conditions of civilization, which, as we've talked about throughout the great conversation, civilization goes back to the root word of city, civitas, and it's the urbanized anchoring of common life that makes possible civilization. And that, of course, was lost in the great demographic calamities that afflicted the late Roman Empire. So around 1000, the year 1000, the beginning of the High Middle Ages, we have a rebirth of philosophical eros in these formerly Roman lands. And Anselm of Canterbury is an absolutely decisive figure in trying to corral this eros into the service of the faith. He's got that famous tagline, right? Faith seeking understanding. Fides quaerens intellectum. And that's the project that will lead into scholasticism. We've seen with Al-Ghazali, we'll see with Maimonides, this medieval concern, the typically medieval problematic of reconciling reason and revelation, which is on display with the whole scholastic project. Abelard is right there in the center of this. Part of this is a recovery of what it means to have a reason. The word, since modern times, has come to mean something like the instrument of calculation. The rationalists are those who are employing technological power to improve man's estate. But as the political philosopher Eric Voegelin points out, in fact, in the great eruption of philosophy in classical Athens, this discovery of nous, mind, and the logos that is correlative to it, that which is what gives us ratio, reason, as we come to understand it in our time. We have to see that intelligence, nous, mind, as something more than an instrument for our passions, for instance, to serve necessary bodily aims even. It's the organ by which the human person attains to ultimate reality. It is that wide scope of ratio, of understanding, reason, that is breaking into Europe with Anselm, with Abelard, with the scholastics. And the question is, when does that start to harden? When does reason, which is something that classically with the first philosophers was something that was open to ultimate reality, which therefore would be religious in the broadest sense, theological in a non-technical sense. When did that become secularized? That is, when did reason turn its face away from the heavens and become something that is merely rationalistic? That didn't happen here. It didn't happen with Anselm. It didn't happen with Abelard. A lot of people will try to say that Thomas Aquinas is kind of that inflection point that could only be seen if one would understand him as having perfected the great distinctions between nature and grace. But we'll talk about that when we get to him. What I'm trying to say, we want to think through, try to feel the excitement of a civilization that is recovering, is starting to have enough leisure to do what civilizations really are meant to do, that is to bring out the creativity and the eros of the mind and the imagination, the whole human person. We've seen that for centuries, the Islamic world was engaged in that. They had enough of a settled existence, enough of a multicultural commerce, trade, enough prosperity enough social, well, it's always tricky, of course. There's always slavery at the back of all of this, and that's part of the conundrum of trying to have a high civilization in the modern world, right? We want to do this better than in the past, but how do we? There we are. I mean, part of what we want to do in the Great Conversation is to ignite that eros of the mind again, is to try to give it purchase in this, our civilization. The civilization that is, and I presume this won't compromise the usefulness of this video. I mean, if we think about how much the invasion of Ukraine means in terms of threatening the international rules of the game, the world order, which has to be seen as one of the great accomplishments of modern times. I mean, that's all on the line. So what do you want to do? We're all feeling powerless. Do we use might to meet might? I mean, in the long term, what is necessary is to be more civilized, is to activate in the world that eros of the human person in a way that becomes a goal for human existence, something that we understand to be the point of it all. And that requires peace. I mean, it requires peace, it requires reconciliation, it requires an ability to live with each other, even if we've got profound disagreements. It requires being able to subordinate our own private good for a negotiation with a common good. Why am I bringing all that up? Well, if we talk about Western Europe, we talk about the Middle Ages here with Abelard, we want to recover that intellectual energy that was right there at the beginning of what would become the University of Paris, this entrepreneurial system of masters taking on students in the 1100s, the 12th century Renaissance, right, as it's called by some in the scholars. This shift from the monastic schools to the cathedral schools on the way to becoming universities. We think about it. We think about the beginning of that trajectory, and then we think about where universities are now. I mean, the whole point of the Abigail Adams Institute is to say, the universities aren't doing that thing, that they aren't preserving an authentic intellectual eros. It's just another machine to plug into a dehumanizing routine, right? What we want is to recover the original civilizational impulse here. And Abelard really, he embodies this. We don't want, even if he's a polarizing figure for many reasons. Bernard of Clairvaux was his last great antagonist. I think this is a cautionary tale because even our great saints, they're not perfect. And that's just, it's an important fact. I say this as a Catholic theologian. It's kind of important to recognize that. Even the great saints, they can have some really big mistakes. And Bernard, he played the ecclesiastical politics game very harshly, and that wasn't to his credit. So Abelard was cocky, he was arrogant. He had reason to be arrogant, but he was arrogant. He believed himself to be the greatest thinker in the world. Now, he might not have been wrong about that, but he loved it. He loved dialectic, he loved debate, he loved to win an argument, he just loved it all. And he just never lost it. And when he shifted from philosophy to theology, as it were, and for him, that's part of the question is, how can that reason, no matter how expansively understood, reason as the organon, that instrument of the human spirit correlated to ultimate reality, how does that sit with a revealed faith, with defined dogmas? Because he, for instance, would take on the Trinity and try to say, the Trinity is reasonable. Why? He's not saying, I'm a philosopher and it would be kind of the problem in the University of Paris in the next century, where the arts masters would say to the theology faculty, we're better than you because, in fact, reason is above. That was not Abelard's. He believed position. Abelard did believe that things had to be revealed and all of that, but he was perfectly, as Anselm, I mean, he follows Anselm in this. He was quite convinced that God is rational all through. God is rational. And so if we have a ratio, our own reason, it is our responsibility to resonate with God's intrinsic rationality. That's what really got him going. He believed that. Now that's on that one side. On the other side, of course, is his explosive relationship with Eloise. And I wish I had more time to talk about, and maybe this would warrant its own kind of recording lecture. Eloise is just one of these remarkable figures, and I didn't quite say it right in the intro. She was opposed to the marriage as a way of dealing with the pregnancy because she did not want to weigh Abelard down with family life. She was convinced that she saw that Abelard was a genius. She wanted him to continue to live out those gifts, and she didn't want to saddle him with domestic concerns, which of course we've talked about in terms of Saint Benedict and so on. The monastic, the celibate vocation, right? To withdraw from the world. To do that, you have to forswear the domestic ties, because that puts you right into the concern for money. You've got to be concerned for money if you're married, and so on. And Eloise knew all of that. She wanted him to be completely devoted to that intellectual life. And she acceded to his wishes. She would obey him. And she's just, even though she was not in any way there was no weakness in her. It's an astonishing kind of personality. And it's worth our meditating more upon her. After his castration and his decision that they should both go in to take the monastic vows, he continued then his teaching and his research, and she became a very, very effective organizer of monastic life. She made a beautiful contribution to this way of existing that was in tension, right, with the new university culture that was arising. And in fact, that university culture would not allow her to have the same education as she had in the convent of Argenteuil that she grew up in, where she learned Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. St. Augustine didn't know Greek. I mean, and certainly not Hebrew. It's just amazing that she did all this. But the university system would be based on clerical status. That is, even if a student wasn't going to be ordained, they all had clerical status, and that means it was only for men. And this would not be remedied for many centuries. So that was a step back for women. But there we are. This is why we don't want to treat anything with nostalgia or with contempt. We just look at it and try to say, what can we do for our civilization, looking back upon these sources?